Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Kauffman, the founder of the Institute of Coaching with Margaret Moore and Susan David, and I am here with Elizabeth Lotardo. And guys, she is a name you need to remember. We're looking for, so Jeff Hall, our executive director, has tasked us with finding the next generation of fabulous coaches who are also writers, who are also data oriented. And this is Elizabeth. So if any of you are looking for a guest who is representing the next gen, here she is. So she is a consultant, an online instructor, and an author of this book, which I just love the title. I love the title. It's Leading Yourself Despite Imperfect Bosses, Weird Economies, Lethargic Coworkers, Annoying Systems, and Too Many Deliverables, so you can find more joy, meaning, and opportunities in the job you already have. So the world is changing. And as we listen to Elizabeth, we can think about all the things we can do differently as we're coaching the next wave of leaders and learning from them. So Elizabeth, start us off.
Well, thanks for having me, Carol. I'm honored to be the token millennial, I guess, on your show, and I've long admired your
Or
work
the
and
beginning of a new wave.
the beginning of a new wave. I've long admired your work, and I think as we grow our understanding collectively about emotions at work, about resilience, about motivation, the role of a coach and the role of someone who is actively leading themselves becomes even more important.
So you told me some shocking things just a little bit earlier, which I thought would be great for you to share with our audience.
So this is the stat that I shared with Carol this morning. I just saw it this morning on LinkedIn. Let me know in the comments if this gives you like a little bit of chest pains. So it took 7 years for the internet, like the World Wide Web, to reach 100 million users. Full 7 years. Guess how long it took ChatGPT? Think about it for a second. 2 months. 2 months. That's how quickly things are changing. And in the face of that, it becomes really obvious that the only person controlling your destiny is you and your ability to step into that as an individual contributor, as a leader, as a coach is what's going to determine your spot in this next crazy world.
Yeah, that's just amazing. And as a side effect, so everyone, we know that it's really hard to be a leader. And I think this is just such a precise way and one little data bit among a sea of data bits of why it's hard to be a leader. And one of the things Elizabeth talks about in her book, by the way, give the book to your clients. I have found it, I've just embarrassed Elizabeth to death here. I have found it, the Institute really stands for the intersection of theory, research, and practice. And that is what Elizabeth does. You read her book and you're laughing, and then she just throws you study after data bit. So it's very evidence-based and funny and wise at the same time. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on imperfect bosses.
So, when I was doing the research for leading yourself, I wanted to uncover what gets in the way of us feeling meaning and joy and opportunities at work. And the number one thing was we don't like our boss. It's not that we hate them, that they're some horrible person. They're just imperfect. They're late to one on ones. They're not as strategic as we'd like them to be. They don't coach us the way we want to be coached. So I wanted to answer the question back to your point based on the research. How do we translate that research into what do you say to this person? Like you show up Monday morning. What do you say to your boss who is a micromanager? What do you say to your boss who's always changing their mind? What do you say to a boss who thinks they know everything, and we know that the world is changing so rapidly? No one knows everything. Like based on this huge volume of data at our fingertips, what do you do with that? And what do you do with it when you're not in charge of everything?
Okay, why don't you give us some ideas? You do a lot of practical tips based on data. So why don't you share some of the things that you think would be helpful for our coaches with their coachees?
So, whether you are coaching someone who is an imperfect boss, whether you are working for an imperfect boss yourself, whether you are that imperfect boss. We're going to get really specific in this conversation about what do you do. So let's tackle the bucket of micromanagers first. This is a really common frustration, especially for entry level or newer employees, someone who's always breathing down their neck, telling them how to do everything every second of the day. It is on you as an individual to be proactive in this environment. If you're reactive to a micromanager, it's only going to get worse. You have to be proactive. What do we mean by that? You're the one establishing a check-in cadence, saying, let's regroup at the start of every day. Let's have a wrap-up conversation before we head out for the evening. Let's go through this plan before I dive in. You're the one that's taking ownership to give that boss a place to land. And that phraseology, give that boss a place to land, can help you deal with a lot of imperfections in your boss. Let's jump to a leader who always changes.
Wait. That's too good to just jump to your next brilliant point.
Okay.
I think when we were talking earlier also, it's like, what is the message that a micromanager is giving you when they micromanage, which is they don't believe in you.
You feel terrible.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you've learned about that and some of the data that you share about it.
So a micromanager has an emotional wake of lack of confidence, of lack of innovation because no one feels that they can speak up, lack of self-startering, lack of employee engagement. The ripple effect of this behavior is profound. But back to leading yourself, you don't have to be the micromanager to change the micromanager. You can change their behavior from the seat of coach. You can change their behavior from the seat of individual contributor. But we know that the longer you stay working for a micromanager, the longer you stay reactive and resentful, you pay such a steep price for that. When you carry it in your body, it really shows up in so many ways.
You know, it's very interesting because you also talk about how to be proactive with the micromanager. And the one thing I love is you do this a lot. You have these little phrases that I love. The emotional wake, you know, like what it is they're doing to everyone. And partly we understand this from the scientific point of view as part of self-determination theory, which is why the research says micromanaging is one of the most difficult things you can do to your people. So I think it's important that you labeled that one first. Okay. Any last comments on micromanager before we go to the next one?
I think we should jump. You're going to have to keep me from jumping.
Okay.
I have a lot in my brain on this topic. Yep. So let's talk about another category that came out in the research for leading yourself that causes people great angst at all levels at work, which is a boss who always changes their mind. We're seeing that so frequently now. And I just wrote about this for Harvard Business Review in the face of rapidly changing technology. You know, we started this conversation talking about ChatGPT, in the face of increasingly competitive landscapes, in the face of rapid change in so many industries. People are all over the place, and it feels like your boss is always changing their mind. Like they tell you to do one thing on a Monday, that thing is different on a Friday. They tell you we're going in this direction, and then suddenly you hear that we're going in a completely different direction. So what can you do as an individual or as a coach to be proactive in the face of a boss who is always changing their mind, seemingly? It is your job to give them a tee up. The benefit of this boss is they have a lot of ideas, they have a lot of energy, they have a lot going on. You need to channel that. Give them the tee up and lay the foundation. Say, here's what we talked about last time. Our goal was to achieve X. We engaged this person and that person, they said this. Based on the timeline we talked about, X, Y, and Z. You're going to have to do some context setting because, again, this boss has a lot swirling in their brain, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And you don't have to pay the price emotionally for this boss who always changes their mind. You can bring them into the conversation and set the stage for them to engage effectively by giving that tee up. Yes, it takes like 2 or 3 more minutes on the front end, but it's going to save you your weekend more times than it does not.
I really love that. What you're really talking about is with all this crazy change that's happening, they're kind of popping around like a piece of popcorn.
Yeah.
And then how do you what I hear is, how do you help ground them? Sort of how do you ground them and kind of bring continuity to them? So love to hear a couple more thoughts about that.
Well, oftentimes, and the suggestion I wanted to make through all of the topics in leading yourself is, we look to the boss to ground us, and we look to the C-suite to lay out the plan for us. And we look to our organization to have it all figured out and show us how to engage. But the dynamics at work are changing. And if you are someone who wants to grow in your career, or even someone who just wants to improve your relationship with your boss, it is on you to ground them. You can do this in a conversation with your boss. You could do it in a meeting with your colleagues. But the person who is able to center the swirling, that's who is going to emerge with purpose and meaning and opportunities as we look into the future of work.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of two things. One is, so we know what we do as coaches is help leaders signpost. You go into a meeting and you sort of signpost. What is it, this meeting is about? What is it that this meeting is to accomplish? And here you're talking about having the employee do the signposting, that the direct report can be signposting to the boss.
Yeah. Well, here's a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of how the sort of authority dynamics are changing in this new world of work. Managers have more direct reports than they have ever had before. So by default, your manager has less time for you than they would have had a decade ago because they have so many of you. Leaders have their own deliverables. It used to be that the job of leader was to lead. Now the job of leader is to both lead and do these other things, fill out these reports, do these metrics, make sure all of these projects are on track. So they're overwhelmed and they don't have the capacity to stand post. Was that your phraseology?
Signpost, yeah.
Signpost all of these meetings. And they shouldn't have to. You can do that from whatever seat you're in.
Well, it's a very empowering perspective. So I think for us as coaches, how to really help the people we're working with be more active in designing their work. So it's sort of grounding them. And what you said about opposite demands, I had one, a lot of my clients, well, not so much anymore, they've gotten better, but they started out as sort of bullies. But one, definitely imperfect, but one guy said, you made me think of this. He said, here's what my life is like, Carol. Anything I do, I've got two guns pointed to my head. One gun goes off if I'm not collaborative and nice and empowering. And the other gun goes off if I don't make my numbers and don't make my people make my numbers. And, that's what my life is like. To which I said, that's true, but remember, there's blanks in those guns. It's going to hurt, but not kill you. But definitely, I think you're completely on target with these crazy conflicting demands that lead to the imperfections, rather than that these are bad people.
And, back to a conversation you and I had earlier, I was intentional with the word choice, imperfect. I didn't want to say how to find meaning when you're working for an asshole. I didn't want to say how to find meaning when you're working for someone who's stupid. In the vast majority of cases, these leaders are people who want to do a good job. They know in their heart that this matters and they care. They're overwhelmed. Their boss is on their back about some number and they're not showing up as their best self 100% of the time. The good news is, you don't always have to pay the price for that. As an individual contributor or as a coach, you can set the stage for this imperfect boss to show up a little better and work a little bit more effectively with you.
Mm-hmm. And of course, all of the kind of orientation and tips that you're talking about, which I think are great, easily transferable into coaching questions. So you've got micromanagers, and then you've got the one that changes their mind all the time, like popping popcorn. And what was the third category you talked about?
So the third frustrating boss is a boss who thinks they know it all. And this has become increasingly frustrating in the face of rapidly changing technology, where we are fully aware nobody knows it all, right? We are all learning every day. Things are changing so fast. Nobody has 100% of the information and knows the right thing to do. This is all imperfect. So working for a boss who acts like they do know it all can be enraging. So how do you manage that and not just spend your whole workday pissed off? You need to narrow the scope of what you're asking this boss. So what do I mean by that? Instead of dumping some proposal at them and saying, well, what do you think about this? They're going to rip it to shreds because they know everything, remember? And it should be like this, and it should be like that, and it should be this, that, and it's all wrong. Instead, you want to point their lens, narrow their focus, and say, based on your experience with customers like this, for talking about a proposal, I'm really interested in your insights on the pricing section. And you are going to zoom them in to where they can be most effective and give them the opportunity to share their wisdom in an area that is actually helpful to you and somewhat contained.
Well, it's interesting because before you were talking about sort of grounding your boss, and this one is sort of directing the eye of Sauron to what you are interested in. And it reminds me a lot of the work we do with boards. I once asked one of my CEOs, like, what's the biggest mistake people do when they go to a board? And one is that they talk too much, but the other one is they don't direct the board to what they need. And so it's basically you got a bunch of ravenous lions who want to be useful.
Yeah.
And if you don't tell them how to be useful, they'll just jump in where they want. So you're one of the things that we talked about that surprised the ton out of you was that you wrote the book for kind of regular people. I mean, most of us look at the top of the house and you're like, no, I'm writing for the middle of the house and even the beginning of the house. And one thing that's been stunning is how many C-level people and CEOs are interested in what you're saying. Because when I read it, so guys, when I read it, I learned things. Okay, I got 40,000 hours of coaching experience, I learned a ton reading this book. And I frankly thought a lot of things were relevant all the way up the house, including to the board level. But this whole idea, I love that. So focusing them where you want to be focused.
Yeah. And back to your comment, I wrote this book for someone in the first 10 to 15 years of their career. And I was transparent about that. Like one of the early pages in the book says, I did not write this book for the executive suite. This is a book about normal people and normal jobs. And
everybody's normal is what it turns out.
Right. That is what it turns out. That this phenomenon of, oh, my boss is always like over directing me and telling me what to do and jumping on all of my stuff plays out in a one-on-one with an entry-level project manager and their supervisor. It also plays out with the CEO and their board. Totally. So no matter the level, the dynamics are frighteningly the same. And you can take that as a good thing or a really bad thing.
No. People are people and everybody is more similar than not, which is sometimes what I remind people when they're going to coach their first CEO. It's the same, just has a bigger title. Your job is to basically overcome your own ego, be of service, and then no matter what. But we have a question here. Thank you from, forgive me for hurting your name, Lillian Basusu. How about coaching a narcissistic boss?
Ooh, so how do you coach? I want to make sure I understand the question. How do you coach up to a narcissistic boss? Like, how do you lead up to that person? I don't see the text, so I'll make sure I have it right.
Okay. Usually Austin puts it up. The question is, how about coaching a narcissistic boss? But I think it's more just how do you help a narcissistic boss? How do you point out to the narcissistic boss what's the negative impact they're having? And I think we'll expand it to if you're working for a narcissistic boss, what to do. So let's just hit all of those.
So how do you deal with a narcissist at work from whatever seat you're in? We'll umbrella this question. I think this is a really interesting term. And it's one that I'm not surprised it's being used more frequently because we are under more pressure at work than we have ever been before to own our performance and to prove ourselves and to show it in the numbers. And that has a ripple effect emotionally. And it's not always received well from other people. So to me, obviously, there's a lot of nuance in this question, but if you're coaching a narcissistic boss, you are going to have to lead them through some self-discovery work to see the ripple effect of their behavior. You cannot point this out to them because you're not going to be the first one. In most cases, it has not been effective. So you want to lead with questions and think about, Did you notice the tone of that meeting change? How do you think the people are feeling after that meeting? Do you want them to feel inspired? What could contribute to them feeling more empowered? And let this person self-discover, because the particular thing about a narcissist is they're not going to hear it from you. They
Mhm.
have to self-discover it. And that's a best practice in really all coaching, is to do some self-discovery questions. But I think it's true particularly in this case. Carol, what would you add to that? I'd imagine you have some experience in this vertical.
Well, I got to tell you, I can't quite top that one. I mean, there's lots and lots of things I do, a lot of challenging, but I love your spin on it, which is lead them in that direction and see if you can help them see themselves. I find that they rarely appreciate the impact they're having on other people.
Yeah.
And even more rarely do people actually tell them the truth. That you know, when you're powerful, people don't tell you the truth. But I love what you're saying is, yeah, but you can ask them some questions. That's
That
just
uncover the
really flipping it. So I want to say Lisa Earl McLeod said something. She said, our CEO client read the book, said the same. He learned from it, bought it for his team. So here's
love
someone where
that.
you had that kind of impact. And Ed Miller Mayer, MD, this is a really good one. I bet you have a lot to say on this. Is so many subject matter experts become leaders, and it's a big transition. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Is a huge transition, because you go from being the best coder, the best project manager, the best whatever it is, to not doing that anymore. And you have this big, messy job full of emotions that doesn't depend at all on what you were so good at. And we see that play out in all types of industries, especially that leap from individual contributor to new manager, where you're fresh into managing all this messiness. So to me, there's a couple of ways you can approach this. If you are in that spot and you are making the leap from I'm good at my job and I have to lead all of these people, be transparent with your motives. People are going to give you a lot more grace when you're open and honest that this is new to you, that you're trying, that you want to do a good job, than if you show up and you act like you know everything when you don't. That's not generally well received. If you are
Hmm.
working for someone who is a new manager, who is still finding their footing as a leader, you got to give them a little bit of grace and lead yourself and manage some of their imperfections proactively. But know that the vast majority of people want to do a good job. New leaders are undertrained. They're under immense pressure. Never before have we had to lead in such a complex environment. I mean that in terms of
Mm-hmm.
hybrid, remote, and office. I mean that in terms of how people are looking at their careers and what they want out of work. Like the order has never been so tall, and unfortunately, new leaders have never been so underprepared. So to me, grace is the word that
Mm-hmm.
really applies to that whole
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Yeah, I think that speaks to a question here that Michael Hoffman has, is what's the evidence that employees have more pressure now than before versus it being less because employees have more power now? So why don't you sort of speak to that?
That's interesting. And I guess it depends on how you define pressure. To me, employees have more pressure than ever before because we are taking a more granular look at performance in most cases than we have ever before. Historically, the sales team had metrics and most other people didn't. Now everyone has KPIs and
Mm-hmm.
everyone is getting performance reviews. So while employees do hold power in terms of at-will employment, we've seen the impact of the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, they are also under performance pressure, and that shows up in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So employees of all levels are under more pressure. Individual contributor, CEO, we're assessing more frequently and with more granularity than we ever have before.
So the other part of your book is so that you can have more purpose and joy at work. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
So the aspirational, we started off with all the ailments at work. The aspirational is meaning, joy, and opportunities. And in the research I was doing for leading yourself and the hundreds of conversations I was having with people at all levels, those were three clear themes. Meaning, we want to know that our work matters, that it counts
Mhm.
for something, that we're leaving a mark in some way on our colleagues, on our organization, on our industry. We want joy. We don't want to feel like totally miserable the whole time doing it. We also want opportunities. We want to be able to grow and to stretch and to flourish. We don't want to do the same thing for the next 50 years, which is not even really a choice in the face of new technology. But inherently, we want to step more boldly into ourselves. The challenge is all that stuff we started with gets in the way. Imperfect bosses, too many deliverables, annoying systems. And the mistake we make is sitting in all of the things we can't control, like annoying systems and too many deliverables and our lethargic coworkers, and forgetting what we can control. And that's the real sentiment of leading yourself, is using whatever amount of power you have, whether it's this much, whether it's huge spanning power, to improve your work experience and improve the work experience of the people around you, even if there's some stuff you can't change.
Mhm. Yes, it's really, so John Whitmore talks about the goal of coaching as increased self-awareness and increased self-responsibility. And what I'm hearing you say is, yes, people might be feeling oppressed, but what you're saying is take self-responsibility. Don't think everything's your fault, but really step in. So we have about 4 minutes left, and there's two things I want. One is just for you to kind of say a little bit about how all this work changed you. But the second is how people can find you and the name of your HBR article.
So, how this work changed me, and I wrote really candidly about this in the book, is I was not a natural self leader. And I think a lot of my generation falls into that category as well. I had to learn, in some ways painfully, how to operate in an imperfect environment. You know, a lot of us enter work, especially the millennial generation, with really high expectations. We want to make a difference. We want our boss to be our cheerleader. We want to have all these opportunities. And then we have a lot to do and too many emails, and it doesn't seem like this fulfilling thing we wanted it to be. And the
Mm.
mistake I made early in my career, and in some ways continue to make, was thinking that I didn't have the power to change that. And it wasn't a matter of picking the perfect company, because no company is perfect. It wasn't a matter of working for a perfect leader, because no leader is perfect. It was being able to have the agency and the direction and the empowerment to make something good out of something imperfect. And that has been the pull through thread of the last 10 years of my journey, and especially the last 3 writing Leading Yourself.
What's interesting, what it's making me think of is a lot of people talk about, oh, these new people, and you're one of them. They had the helicopter moms.
Yeah.
Your mom wasn't a helicopter mom, and she's the reason you're here, which is I owe her a lot. But I could see that in terms of if people are then kind of expecting to be taken care of, and it's not really that they're whining, it's that they've been set up in some ways to be parented well, and now you're in a situation where that's not possible.
Yeah.
How then to lean in and lead yourself? I think it's I think the book I think it should be a bestseller, and I think many people should read it, and it helps reverse a lot, but also you just have a lot of really good tips in there. So how can people reach you? And guys, if by any chance you don't remember, contact us and we'll get you to Elizabeth. But
Well, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Elizabeth Lotardo. I've also written a number of pieces for HBR. If you search my name, you'll find my most recent one, How to Deal with a Leader Who Always Changes Their Mind, which expands on some of what we covered here. And I put out new content every week on LinkedIn. I also have a lot of courses on LinkedIn Learning, so I'm an easy gal to find with a not too common last name.
Okay, Elizabeth, Lotardo, Lotardo. So we have just 1 minute. What would you like your kind of final couple of tips or comments to be before we say goodbye?
I think the final message I'd like to leave all of you with is the dedication of my book, which is you are never powerless. In the face of emerging technology, in the face of a boss who might not be great, in the face of a company who's maybe behind or not going in a direction you agree with, you are never powerless. Whether that means making the most of this job and using it as a stepping stone, whether that means doing something new, the power is always in your hands.
Mm, wonderful. And we're getting a question from Lillian. Is it on Amazon? She's from South Africa.
It is on Amazon. It is also on Kindle, like ebook. There's an audiobook as well. So it should be available everywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Porchlight, whatever your vendor of choice.
Okay, thank you. Last comment from Carol Ann, that she loves the use of the word imperfection. It's such a helpful frame for navigating the world we're living in today, and it is. Elizabeth, thank you. And I'm going to try to figure out how to get you back.
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me, Carol. I've learned so much from the way you approach leadership, and I think the institute you've created is really a world-changing force.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. Next time with Alyssa Cohen on startups.